Hey everybody, welcome to the Nerd Marketing Podcast. On this episode, we talk about the Jonathan Adler acquisition by Consortium Brands, what they were looking for and what they're going to do with it. We talk about e-commerce benchmarks, what happened in e-commerce this week. We deep dive on the beauty category, give a couple examples there of brands that are killing it. And we wrap up with some questions about marketing efficiency and why you should look at marketing efficiency instead of ROAS. Hope you enjoy the episode. All right, Mike, another week, another big acquisition to talk about. Last week, we touched on the True Religion acquisition. This week, we want to talk about Consortium Brand Partners who acquired Jonathan Adler, actually acquired at the end of December. The sale price was not disclosed, but Adler was doing $150 million in top line. Adler is going to remain as the CEO, the chief creative officer at the company. And this makes the third e-commerce acquisition for Consortium Brands. First was Draper James, which is Reese Witherspoon's company. And then, she was the influencer behind it. Second, Outdoor Voices, which they acquired in 2024. So really interesting to dive into. So I know Jonathan Adler from my day when I ran a furniture brand. I remember hanging out with him at ICFF in New York. He was a really quiet guy, kind of like had this geeky thing going on. And he was the lead designer, and apparently he still is. And, congrats to him. So I don't know how big they were back then, but certainly they got really big. And they do a lot through catalogs. So, we're big fans of that at Postpilot. But I thought it'd be interesting to kind of look at what Consortium Brands is doing with their acquisitions and compare it to the Outdoor Voices acquisition, because that was another very public one backed by an influencer. And there's some interesting similarities and differences between these.
Yeah, totally. I think it's an interesting contrast in those two acquisitions. And that I think is part of what's fascinating about deep diving into the recent acquisitions, because they don't fit the same profile, right? So Jonathan Adler, agree, really cool designer. And that's a growth story, right? That's the typical, how do we pour more gas on the fire situation? And then Outdoor Voices was like one of those poster childs for the D2C sort of flame out, where they raised tons of funding, they got a ton of buzz, and then sort of the whole wheels came off, and Consortium buys that as more of a turnaround story to do a hard reset.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if Adler ever raised money before this. I'm sure he probably did on some level, but we do know Outdoor Voices raised over $60 million. They had a very vocal founder. They had some drama with the founder. They missed their earnings. Eventually, I think the founder left, or they kicked the founder out. So I think it's more interesting to see what they didn't do with Adler. Right. So Consortium Brands bought both these. OV being a little bit more of a turnaround. It was a bit of an S show when they picked it up. The founder had left. They had cash issues. They missed earnings. And yet Adler's a growth story. So they're managing them both a little bit different. But I would say in both cases, they're leaning into some of their strengths in distribution and focusing the product line. So for Outdoor Voices, I know they streamlined the product. They shuttered a bunch of underperforming stores, which I think is what True Religion did too. Got inventory under control. So it's just a lot of the blocking and tackling of retail. I think they gave up on the whole, we're going to make this a community and lifestyle empire thing, which is what I think the founder was pushing. And on the other hand, Adler, who had great unit economics and was growing really well, introduced some new product categories. They want to bring them a little bit more into B2B, right, which is great for a furniture line. They want to double down on wholesale and push into corporate hospitality internationally. So I think in Adler's case, they have a good thing going, and it's just about lending some good retail chops to that and putting gas on the fire.
Yeah, I think they're they're still playing to their strengths, I guess, at consortium, but they're recognizing that these are two totally different brands with needing two totally different playbooks. And it's interesting to see funds make acquisitions that don't always follow the same playbook, and recognizing that and what they're doing to solve for both of those scenarios.
Yeah, consortium brands obviously really good at retail though, and thinking through. I was reading one interview with the team there, and they talk about how D2C brands just often have a little bit of magic, and they shouldn't be averse to putting that magic through traditional distribution channels, and often it works. So, good luck to them. Congratulations to Jonathan Adler, and we'll be watching to see what happens there.
Yep.
All right, Mike, this is the segment where we like talking about benchmarks for the week, e-commerce benchmarks. Post-Pilot, we've got access to thousands of e-commerce stores. So we aggregate the data, and then we tell you what happened in e-commerce this week. So this week, if we look at, year-over-year performance is up from last week, but it's about even year-over-year. So I think last week we reported it was down 11% for the same week versus prior year. We came back up to baseline this week.
Yeah. And the other interesting trend that we continue to see that started last year and sort of has persisted is at the higher end of the spectrum, the mid to high 8 and 9 figure brands are tending to outperform the lower end of the spectrum on a comp basis. So, it is getting harder for those startups to break through.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that are in sort of that 1 to 10 million range versus the others that are continuing to sort of double down and on their marketing channels or marketing efforts and are actually increasing their overall share. Not to say that others can't break out, but on average and in aggregate, the bigger brands sort of continue to get bigger. The smaller ones are having more trouble getting more traction.
Yep. And we want to do a little bit of a deep dive on the beauty category, the health and beauty category. A lot going on in California this week. That tends to be where most of the buyers are. You can see here, followed by Texas and New York. Florida as the top location for where the buyers are in this category. One thing we see with a lot of beauty brands is right here, Mike. Like we all think of these brands are all marketed to like the youth, and they're leaning in on platforms like TikTok, which skew younger. But when you look at the average age of the consumer in health and beauty, it's really like someone old, Mike, like our age. It's
Old like us. It's totally.
It's like you look at it, it's like over 60% is probably 40 to mid 50s. So yeah, not only old, but kind of settled. They are married. 2/3 are married. They have a very high household income. 40% are over 125K a year. And then we see a high household net worth here. So a bit of a disconnect between the marketing that these brands do and the actual buyers of the product, which is often happens. Sometimes you've got an aspirational product and everybody does aspire to be younger. But maybe where the disconnect is a little bit less intentional is sort of in the distribution of these products. So we've got some data here on the health and beauty category. Nordstrom's, a lot of these shoppers go to Nordstrom's, Lane Bryant, and Victoria's Secret as the top 3. So I would have guessed Ulta Beauty because I know a lot of brands lean in on Ulta or Sephora. But wow, a lot more buyers at Victoria's Secret and Nordstrom's than either of those channels.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Something we've observed for a while now, especially in the beauty category, is that disconnect that you mentioned between what a lot of brands think their target customer is and who their customer actually is. And you can get this if you plug in the Post-Pilot app. You can get this report. It's free, but it's worth checking out for yourself. As you think about your marketing messages, make sure that who you think your customer is actually matches the true demographics of your customer profile.
Yeah,
Might
and
change your approach.
I would think as you're looking at physical distribution, where's your current customer shopping, versus like instead of just throwing Sephora or Ulta up against the wall, like, hey, where is the customer actually shopping? And maybe we should try harder to get into those channels. So let's talk about a couple of beauty case studies.
Yeah. So there was one that came in just today. Actually, we were seeing it's a brand that has a really high AOV. It's actually more in the fashion category. It's a brand that everybody would know. We haven't published it publicly yet, but it's high AOV, so typically $1,000 in AOV. And they ran prospecting campaigns using our acquisition AI tech, which is like lookalike audiences using our proprietary data set. And they got an 8x ROAS on pure cold prospecting, which obviously is super high. But I think it speaks to the characteristics that we tend to see work particularly well in acquisition. And this goes, I'm sure it comes as no surprise, this goes for pretty much any channel, but especially in direct mail, where on a CPM basis, it's going to look higher. On an engagement basis and conversion rate basis, it's also going to look a lot higher. So you have to balance that out. And AOV is sort of the big lever you have to make those numbers pencil out really well. So the TLDR is basically you don't need a huge conversion rate when you've got $1,000 AOV to see really strong returns on acquisition. And this was a great example of that. So 8x ROAS, not what we would set as the expectation for brands that are trying to test into pure cold acquisition, but a great example of what's possible and the impact that AOV has on driving improved performance when you're testing any cold prospecting channel. And the other we just published recently, Sofia Vergara's brand, Todi makeup brand, and they followed sort of the typical playbook that we have of starting lower in the funnel with reactivation of folks that hadn't bought, in 6 months to a year plus, as well as people that had been sitting on their email list and you'd been emailing for a while, still never pulled the trigger and actually bought something. They were getting consistent results there, 4 or 5x ROAS on those types of campaigns. And that's a really strong use case for beauty brands in particular, because you've got these folks that bought from you. Typically, they're buying, in 90, maybe 180 day supplies of this product max. And then for whatever reason, they get distracted by something else. They go switch to another brand, whatever it is. And they need that nudge. And they've been sitting on your email list this whole time. Obviously, it hasn't been effective, or else they would have bought from you in that time. How do you get them to come back and buy after the time elapses that you would have expected them to already come back on their own? Well, that's what beauty brands consistently see is a really good performing campaign, is that reactivation when you're looking past that time period in which you would have expected them to come back on their own. Reactivation is sort of that 6 month to 1 year plus mark. And then folks, again, that have been sitting on an email list or browsing the website and still have not converted, we can match those folks to a postal address and get them off the fence, get them to come back and complete that purchase, and tends to work really well. So crushing it with Todi consistently, and then you can automate all this stuff so that it works like an email flow. It's triggered in real time and always on in the background, driving incremental customer acquisition, incremental LTV.
Some of the best marketing you can do, like highest ROI, it's right there in your customer data. So great examples from the beauty category. We'll pick another category next week to go deep in, maybe furniture, maybe apparel, Mike. Not sure what it's going to be today.
Surprise me.
I will surprise you.
What is marketing efficiency? Most people think I'm just going to look at my ROAS number. That's my efficiency. But I think there's a broader way of thinking about this. What's your definition of sort of marketing efficiency, and how do you improve that number?
Yeah, I think I wrote this article in Nerd Marketing probably like 5 to 10 years ago about how you shouldn't all rely on ROAS. I think it was like ROAS is BS, but obviously, like it's all you got in many cases. ROAS is the total revenue over the total spend, but it's not nuanced. It doesn't contain a lot of information, right? And so a better metric, I think, is marketing efficiency. So you can calculate it a number of ways. I like to look back at, the past 12 months revenue and divide that by the total marketing spend. But it's not just like your ad spend. It's like how many people were, the cost of the people involved in managing the program, or the agency that's involved in managing the program, and your marketing team. Like it all kind of rolls up. And so you get this overall efficiency number, and you kind of want to track that over time. There are different flavors of that. Some people call it like CAC to LTV, to lifetime value. But the general idea is you don't want to just look at ROAS, which looks at the ad cost. You want like the total cost that went into that marketing program. The problem with ROAS is you could have a number that looks good on paper, like we got a 3x ROAS or a 5x ROAS. But as soon as you add in the cost of your marketer, the agency, all these other ancillary things, it goes to zero pretty quickly. So I think it's one of the many problems with ROAS. And I think I kind of fault multi-touch attribution as part of the issue here. Back, when you and I started our brands like 20 years ago, it was last touch, and it was just like easy. You attributed the wholesale to one channel, right? The last one that touched the customer. And I think now that we have the ability to measure all the different touches on social media, on content, organic, through email, through direct mail, like you get that situation where you often have staff manning each one, or people responsible for each channel. They measure their own channel and its contribution to the whole in the multi-touch attribution model. And then you add up all the attributed revenue, and it's like 300 times the total revenue. So to get away from that, I would encourage all marketers to kind of look at their efficiency metric, on a monthly basis, looking back the last 12 months. It's just a great place to start.
Yeah, I think you're hearing a lot more about people thinking in terms of contribution margin versus just gross margin. So taking in a lot of those factors that you're talking about and looking at true profitability of marketing as holistically. And to your point, yeah, multi-touch, people are trying to get that to one number. They're trying to allocate a portion of each conversion to, 10% to this channel and 6% to that channel. But I think to your point, especially when you have individual channel managers, everyone's sort of trying to push for their channel to look really good and sort of spin the numbers. And the other thing that you lose with some of that is, we talked about it earlier, that halo effect. And so on the flip side, you've got people saying, well, I can't justify this channel if I look at it on, an MMM base, because it doesn't tell me that it is driving incremental profitability. But then you remove that channel from the mix, and your efficiency in your other channels tends to go down, because you're not getting that, you're not getting the halo effect and sort of the holistic marketing mix that drives efficiency across multiple touch points. And I think the challenge that we see a lot is brands really try and micromanage efficiency at the channel level and incrementality at the channel level, and they manage it to death, right? Like they just are pulling everything out because they can't
Yeah.
make it look right in this particular model. And to your point, they end up eventually going to zero because they no longer have total revenue that can support the infrastructure of the business.
Yeah, I think J. Crew's a great example. Like before they went bankrupt, because they cut their catalog. You know, they saw it as like this big honking cost on their P&L. Cut it, and probably like the next month got very efficient because they didn't have this cost. But what they didn't see was the longer term impact of that catalog. Like it was actually acquiring a different kind of customer than the other channels, and it was the sort of the tide that lifted all boats, in that the customers that came in or they saw the messaging through the catalog also spilled over into Facebook and into email and bought through those channels, and sort of helped those channels out. So when they cut the catalog, the business, fast forward a couple of months, they've got no profits, they're burning cash, and they declare bankruptcy.
To your point, you stop acquiring customers and it's like, oh, well, my retention channels look great, right? Except as you cut those other channels that were generating new customers, you now have a smaller base of folks that you can go on to retain later. So it looks like you're optimizing your marketing spend in the short term. What brands just fail to recognize over and over again is you are basically sacrificing your entire future for this short-term efficiency gain. Eventually that new customer account is going to flow through to your retention segments, and all of a sudden on a ROAS or efficiency basis they look really good, but you just aren't generating any revenue or total volume, and you can't support the business.
Right.
And I think that's the nuance that brands, really need to come to terms with. And some of the best brands that we see have really come to understand that. They understand they need to fuel that top of funnel. They understand that it's not about maximizing the incrementality of every individual channel and saying like, this is crushing it on contribution margin, and if it's not, I'm just going to start yanking everything out. They're growing by addition, not by subtraction. You can't cut your way to growth, really. We saw this, quick story, we saw this in one of our acquisitions, Drew, a number of years ago with a brand that had a little bit of a different problem. They were in decline, they were losing money, but they actually were getting a fairly healthy ROAS, or on a contribution margin basis, in search. And we were like, okay, let's step on the gas there. And we pushed more money into search. But what we didn't anticipate to the extent that we saw was how much it ended up juicing the other channels' performance. So all of a sudden, Facebook got way more efficient. All of a sudden, email skyrocketed because we were not just optimizing the email as a channel, but we were bringing in so much more volume and fresh volume to our email campaigns.
Sure.
We ended up tripling that business inside of 90 days, which was insane because this was already almost a $40 million business at the time. And it was a result of sort of the opposite of what we're talking about. It was starting to push more money into channels that ended up spilling over and driving greater efficiency across our entire mix. And we wouldn't have seen that if we were only really optimizing for, that one specific channel
or campaign, that ROAS on the single campaign. Yeah. One of my mentors once told me that this stuff is like, it's not a snapshot, it's a motion picture. You got to watch it over time, focus on the marketing efficiency metrics over the month, over the quarter, to really get the sense of what's impacting your customer acquisition. So that's our little rant on marketing efficiency. If you have any more questions, shoot us an email, Drew at Postpilot or Michael at Postpilot, and we'll answer it next week.
So Drew, today let's unpack what might be the shortest lived social media ban in history, TikTok. But I think there's some learnings we can take from it already in 2025.
Yeah, it was like I had all these show notes about how to manage the ongoing TikTok ban. And obviously it lasted, 24 hours?
Yeah, so scratch that whole thing. But it was revealing, and I think as folks, you and I that talk to brands all day long, it was interesting. We were keeping a close eye on these developments, sort of had a front row seat to how brands were thinking about it, and
Yeah,
uh,
we
and
talked to a
it
lot.
was learnings.
We talked to a lot of brands at Post Pilot, and I would say in general, TikTok is not like core to any of their strategy. It's not like the number one channel that's driving the brands that we work with. Um, None really come to mind where it's like a top channel, but certainly all of them were intrigued by it, experimenting on it, because it promised low customer acquisition cost and just like a whole new audience.
Yeah, it was also just a big awareness play, right? And there's not a lot of new channels that have emerged over the last couple of years that really give people access to new prospects and help generate awareness. And people are always trying to crack that code on what's going to get a lot of engagement, a lot of visibility cheaply through TikTok. And there were a lot of brands that, again, while they might not have had a TikTok shop that was generating a huge chunk of their revenue, they were still dependent on it for, again, awareness, top of funnel building, and they were still concerned about the prospect of losing that as a channel.
Yeah, I think it's something we've seen before. It's like a brand leans in on one channel that's delivering amazing results and it gets burned. It's happened with Amazon. With plenty of people have gotten locked out of Amazon. It happened with an over reliance on Meta in 2018 with iOS 14, that shut down Meta, or was that 21?
That was 21, but there were others, everything that came before that. There were still times before that where it wasn't the just throw $1 in, get $5 out, money machine that it was at the very early stages.
Yeah, and it's happened with Google and with Gmail, where brands that rely too much on email get shut out or are unable to hit the inbox. So I think the lesson is that it's a reminder just to diversify your marketing channels, right? If you get good economics, you want to have multiple channels going. It's a lesson I think CMOs have learned time and time again. It's like, how many times do we have to drill it into their thick skulls that like you can get burned if you're 100% in on one channel? And obviously you and I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because we say this all the time because we run a direct mail agency, a direct mail platform, but not enough brands think that way. It's like they find one thing that's working and they go all in on it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it does serve as this good reminder. It feels like we need this sort of wake up call every couple of years where it's like everybody knows it, right? Everybody panics after iOS 14 comes out. It's like, never again will I let this happen. We will diversify our mix. We will not be dependent on a channel. And then, everybody, a couple of years go by, people sort of get comfortable in something and slip sort of right back into those old routines. And then you need this smack in the face every couple of years of like, oh crap, we became too dependent again. And yeah, so let's let this TikTok ban serve as that occasional slap in the face reminder this time.
Yeah, we're all out. We're in Vegas. We're out on the gambling floor at the Mirage, and we keep throwing our money down on the same channel. It's not always the best strategy. So you and I came up with three things that like a wise CMO should think about going forward. This is sort of the shot across the bow. There've been many of them. But I got number one, use this as motivation to start testing new channels, right? If the iOS updates didn't get you and the Gmail updates didn't get you, then the TikTok update gets you. And if none of those got you, like something's going to get you in the future. So use it as motivation. This time of the year, in Q1, you're nowhere near Black Friday, right? Start experimenting and adding some new channels just to see if you can get something else cranking. So that's the first tip we got.
Totally. And the worst time to test something new is like reacting in a panic mode and feeling like you got to get something stood up and working instantly. Because anytime you try something new, it takes some time to dial it in, right? So start that in advance. Great point, Drew. I think number two that I'm thinking is, again, this isn't something that you all haven't thought about before, but it's the reminder that you need to get serious about your first party data. It's the one asset that you own. It's the email addresses, it's the phone numbers, and now it's the physical addresses of your customers that no third party channel can just suddenly take away from you. So if you're not harvesting that, if you're not nurturing and really trying to drive success in those channels and drive increased volume in that first party data, you're missing out.
Yeah, and I think given our background in private equity and buying and selling businesses, this is what gets sold. It's like, how many active customers do you have in your customer file? And the more data you have on your own customers, the better, right? You shouldn't leave that to Amazon. Shouldn't leave it to Meta. You shouldn't leave that data on TikTok. Try to collect as much as you can.
Awesome. Totally right. What's the third, Drew?
The third we have is look at your customer acquisition costs across channels. So the brands that tend to weather these changes the best are the ones that have a pretty low customer acquisition cost relative to what they charge. So another way to say it is like decent enough margin structure that they can weather this, that they can pivot, that they can absorb higher CACs if that comes through. And they maintain that efficiency across channels. So I'd say those are the three things to focus on. Obviously, you and I work in direct mail, and I think that's sort of our attempt to say, like, hey, it's a great way to combine digital and physical to get another channel going, one that isn't owned by China or will be pulled, or the tariffs increased anytime soon. So build resistance through diversification, I think, is our big takeaway from this TikTok episode.
Yeah, and the other thing that we see time and time again with brands is, as these brands start to expand their channel mix, they start to see these halo effects and spill over across their other channels. So when you start at a lot of brands, again, as they scale, are starting to think more in terms of MER versus individual channel level CACs and ROAS. And what they see consistently is they start pushing more money into one channel, and all of a sudden their CAC and performance in Meta starts to improve. Where they felt like they had plateaued in a certain channel, that multiple touch point that marketing mix actually starts helping drive efficiency more broadly across the total mix, including in other channels that you weren't investing more in. So I think that diversification, again, to your point, is great from a risk mitigation perspective. It also helps you sort of break out of these plateaus that you get from focusing on individual channels.